Welcome to Scoli Sleep Stories. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let the day soften around you and settle in for a calm documentary made for curious minds. If these stories help you rest, learn, or simply enjoy a quieter part of the day, please consider liking this episode and subscribing to the channel. Now, when you are ready, let us begin. Chapter 1: The First Leaves in Ancient China. Long before tea was poured into porcelain cups, long before it crossed oceans in wooden chests, or appeared in busy markets and quiet kitchens, it began as a leaf. The leaf came from an evergreen plant known today as Camellia sinensis. Evergreen means that the plant keeps its leaves through the year, holding its green color even when other plants fade or rest. Its leaves are smooth and glossy, with a gentle point at the tip. In the right climate, the plant grows well on hillsides, where mist lingers in the morning, rain settles softly into the soil, and mountain paths wind between stones, shrubs, and trees. The tea plant is native to parts of East Asia, likely including southwestern China and nearby regions. In those landscapes, the air can be damp and cool, and clouds may drift low over forested slopes. Wild tea plants and their relatives would have grown among many other useful plants, known by local people over generations. Before tea became a famous drink, before it had a place in poetry or ceremony, it was simply part of the living world, green leaves in shaded places, touched by rain, warmed by filtered sun. Tea culture first developed in ancient China, but its earliest beginnings are not perfectly clear. They belong partly to history, partly to archaeology, and partly to legend. Archaeology is the study of physical traces from the past: old tools, vessels, plant remains, tombs, and other objects that people left behind. A legend is different. It is an old story that may carry memory, meaning, or cultural wisdom, even when it cannot be proven as a precise event. One of the best-loved legends of tea tells of Emperor Shennong. Shennong is a mythic figure in Chinese tradition, remembered as a culture hero connected with agriculture and herbal medicine. In old stories, he studied plants carefully, tasting leaves, roots, and seeds to learn which might nourish the body and which might harm it. He belongs to the deep symbolic past, where story and memory are woven together. It is said that one day Shennong was resting outdoors while a small pot of water warmed over a fire. The water had been set to boil. Nearby, a tea plant grew quietly in the breeze. As the water trembled and steam began to rise, a few leaves loosened from the branch and drifted down into the pot. They floated for a moment, then softened in the heat. The water changed color, very lightly at first. A pale fragrance rose with the steam, green and earthy, like leaves after rain. Shennong, curious about plants and their qualities, tasted the liquid. In the legend, he found it refreshing. The infused water seemed to clear the senses and bring gentle energy to the body. And so, the story says, tea was discovered. Of course, this is not confirmed history. No one can point to one exact day, one exact pot, or one exact drifting leaf. The story matters not because it proves a fact in the modern sense, but because it tells us how tea was remembered, as something connected with nature, with health, with careful observation, and with the meeting of water and leaf. In the long beginning of tea, people probably did not prepare it as many people do today. The earliest uses may have been quite different from a modern cup of loose leaves steeped in hot water. Leaves may have been chewed. They may have been cooked with other plants. They may have been brewed into a bitter liquid or mixed into medicinal preparations. Medicinal means used for health or healing, and in ancient times many plants were valued first because people believed they helped the body in some way. Ancient people learned from the land slowly. A plant might be noticed because animals ate it, or because its taste was strong, or because it seemed to sharpen attention during long days of work or travel. Knowledge passed from hand to hand and voice to voice. Someone gathered leaves in a basket. Someone warmed water in a clay vessel. Someone remembered that a certain plant was useful in damp weather, after a heavy meal, or during fatigue. Over many seasons, small observations became customs. The word tea in ancient sources is sometimes difficult to interpret. Old writings may use terms that do not match modern categories exactly. A reference to a bitter plant, a medicinal drink, or a leaf preparation may or may not mean tea, as we understand it now. Historians ask gentle questions. What plant was meant? How was it prepared? Was it eaten, boiled, or drunk? Was it medicine, food, or refreshment? Still, there are firmer traces. Some of the earliest physical evidence for tea comes from the Han Dynasty period. A dynasty is a period when one ruling family governs a country or empire. In the tomb of Emperor Jing of Han, who died in 141 BCE, researchers have identified remains of tea. Ancient tombs sometimes preserve objects or plant materials that help modern scholars understand what people valued. The presence of tea remains in such a setting suggests that tea was known and significant by that time, at least in some circles. It does not tell us everything about how ordinary people used tea, or exactly how it tasted, but it offers a quiet piece of evidence from the distant past. Imagine that tomb, sealed for centuries, holding traces of a leaf once gathered from a living plant. Outside, dynasties rose and changed. Roads lengthened, cities grew, languages shifted. Yet in that protected place, a small botanical memory remained. From such traces and from later writings, a picture begins to form. Tea was not born all at once as a refined drink. It emerged gradually. It belonged first to landscapes of rain and mist, to people who knew plants closely, to healers and gatherers, and to local customs that may have varied from valley to valley. Its early flavor may have been stronger, more bitter, or more earthy than many teas known today. It may have been blended with other ingredients, cooked into mixtures, or prepared in ways now mostly forgotten. There is something gentle in this uncertainty. It reminds us that history is not always a straight road. Sometimes it is more like a mountain path after rain, partly visible, partly hidden by moss and leaves. We can follow it for a while, noticing stones underfoot, the scent of wet bark, and the silver light on the hillside. Then the path turns, and we must move carefully. In ancient China, the first leaves of tea belonged to this kind of path. They were real leaves from a real plant. They were also leaves of story, drifting through legend into a pot of boiling water. Over time, people returned to them. They returned to the bitterness, the warmth, the fragrance, and the clear feeling the leaves seemed to bring. What may have begun as medicine slowly became something more familiar, something prepared again and again in daily life. And so, from the first uncertain leaves, tea began to move gently through the centuries. Chapter 2. Tea becomes a daily companion. Tea did not become a daily drink all at once. It moved slowly, like mist lifting from a hillside, revealing one terrace, then another beyond it. In the long centuries after its earliest use, tea remained many things at once: a plant of the mountains, a medicinal ingredient, a local custom, a warming bowl, and little by little, a familiar companion. In ancient China, during the Han Dynasty and the periods that followed, tea became increasingly known, especially in southern regions where the climate suited the tea plant. Through the Han, the Three Kingdoms, the Jin, and the northern and southern dynasties, tea appears more often in records, though not always in the same form or with the same meaning. The story is gradual and uneven. In one place, tea may have been valued mainly as a healthful plant. In another, it may have been cooked with other ingredients. In another, it may have been offered to a guest, not yet as a formal custom, but as a thoughtful gesture. Early tea could be chewed, boiled, mixed, or prepared in ways that would seem unfamiliar now. Still, over time, people returned to the leaves. On sloping land in the south, farmers learned the habits of tea bushes. Camellia sinensis is evergreen, holding its leaves through the seasons. Its young leaves and buds were gathered by careful hands, often in the freshness of morning. One can imagine bamboo baskets, light but strong, resting against a hillside while the day begins. The air is cool, the leaves are glossy, the ground is damp from night rain. Cultivation, the deliberate growing of plants, became more organized as demand grew. Tea was no longer only something gathered from wild or semi-wild places. It was tended. People observed which slopes, soils, and seasons gave pleasing leaves. They learned when to pick and how to process what they had gathered. These practices changed greatly over time, and they varied from region to region, but the patient work of growing tea had begun to shape the landscape. Early preparation was quite different from much modern loose-leaf tea. Today, many people picture dried leaves placed in a pot, covered with hot water, and poured into a cup. In earlier centuries, tea often passed through many steps before it reached the bowl. Fresh leaves might be steamed to soften them and slow certain changes. They might be pressed into firm cakes, called compressed tea cakes, which were easier to store and carry. Later, a piece of the cake could be dried further, roasted over heat, ground into powder, and boiled in water. The hearth was simple. A clay pot or metal vessel might rest over a quiet fire. Steam rose slowly. The smell was earthy, green, and warm. Sometimes salt was added. At times, other flavorings joined the brew, depending on local habit and personal taste. These additions remind us that tea was not always prepared according to the delicate methods familiar from later centuries. It was practical, nourishing, and adaptable. A person might hold a warm bowl in both hands after a long walk or a morning of work. The taste may have been bracing, slightly bitter, perhaps savory if salt had been used. Its appeal was not only flavor. Tea offered refreshment. It helped bring a feeling of clarity. Because tea naturally contains caffeine, it could support wakefulness during study, travel, conversation, or labor. But tea was not simply useful. It also became part of hospitality, the practice of welcoming others with care. To offer a bowl of tea was to make a small space of comfort. A guest arriving from the road could be given warmth and attention. A friend could be invited to pause. A family might share the drink in the quiet rhythm of the day. These ordinary gestures are not always preserved clearly in historical records, yet they are part of how any drink becomes woven into daily life. Much of what we know from early writing comes from educated people, scholars, officials, and members of elite households. Their poems, essays, and records tell us about refined gatherings and thoughtful appreciation. They describe tea in connection with conversation, writing, and the pleasures of a well-ordered life. Yet beyond those writings were many other lives: farmers, merchants, travelers, monks, cooks, servants, and families whose habits were less often written down. Tea culture did not develop in the same way for everyone. It spread unevenly across regions and social classes. Some people drank it often, others rarely. Some knew it as a local product, others as a valued item brought from far away. By the Tang dynasty, which lasted from 618 to 907, tea drinking had spread more widely and become more visible in Chinese culture. The Tang period was a time of lively cities, long-distance exchange, literature, religion, and artistic refinement. Tea fit naturally into this world. It could be carried, traded, served, discussed, and praised. It belonged to marketplaces and monasteries, to official homes and roadside stops, to kitchens and quiet studies. Still, even in the Tang, there was no single tea custom shared by all. Some people boiled tea from compressed cakes, some added salt, some valued particular waters, tools, or leaves. Others may have cared less for refinement and more for warmth and refreshment. Tea was becoming common, but common does not mean simple. It carried many meanings at once. Imagine the many hands through which a portion of tea might pass. Hands pick the young leaves from a hillside shrub. Hands spread them, steam them, press them, and dry them. Hands wrap a cake of tea for storage or travel. Hands carry it in a basket, a pack, or a cart. Hands break off a piece, roast it near the fire, grind it, and stir it into warming water. And finally, hands offer the bowl. In this slow chain of gestures, tea became more than a plant. It became a habit of care. It entered the pauses between tasks and the spaces between people. It refreshed the body and sharpened the mind. It could be plain or refined, local or traded, medicinal or social. As tea became more familiar, some began to look at it with deeper attention. Which leaves were best? Which water brought out their character? Which tools were suitable? How should the fire be tended? And when was the water ready? Such questions turned a daily drink into a subject worthy of careful study. And so, from fields and hearths, from baskets and clay jars, the story moves toward a quieter room. There, tools are arranged with care. Water begins to tremble over a small brazier. A thoughtful writer gathers what is known, and tea, already a companion to many, begins to take its place as an art. Chapter 3: The Tea Classic and the Art of Preparation. In the long, bright centuries of the Tang dynasty, tea was already finding its place in Chinese life. It was grown on hillsides, carried along roads and rivers, and prepared in homes, temples, and official residences. Yet among the many people who drank tea, wrote of tea, and worked with tea, one name came to be remembered with special affection: His name was Lu Yu. Lu Yu lived in the 8th century, during the Tang dynasty, a time when poetry, painting, trade, and refined arts flourished in many parts of China. Later generations would call him the Sage of Tea, not because he invented tea drinking, for tea had been known long before him, but because he gathered together what was known, observed it carefully, and gave it thoughtful shape. Around 760 CE, Lu Yu wrote a small but influential book called The Classic of Tea. In Chinese it is known as the Cha Jing, means tea, and Jing can mean a classic or important text. It is considered the earliest known major work devoted entirely to tea. The book was not only a list of instructions, it was also a way of seeing. Lu Yu wrote about the tea plant and how it grew. He wrote about cultivation, tools, utensils, water quality, preparation methods, and the spirit of attentive tea drinking. Utensils are the tools used for a task. In writing about them, Lu Yu helped tea become not merely something useful to drink, but something worthy of attention. One may imagine a quiet study in the Tang world. There is a low table, plain and orderly. Bamboo tools rest nearby, light in the hand and smooth from use. A small brazier glows with coals. A brazier is a little container used to hold hot charcoal, just enough to heat water steadily. Nearby, a pot waits. A bowl has been placed with care. Nothing seems hurried. Each object has its purpose. The tea of Lu Yu's time was not usually prepared like many loose-leaf teas today. In the Tang dynasty, tea leaves were often steamed, pressed into firm cakes, dried, and stored. These compressed tea cakes made the leaves easier to keep and carry. When it was time to prepare the drink, a portion of the cake might be warmed or roasted, then ground into powder. The powder could then be boiled in water, sometimes with salt, according to customs of the period. The whole process asked for patience. A piece of tea cake might be held near the heat, gently roasted until its fragrance changed. The warmth would awaken the leaf. It might become drier, more brittle, easier to grind. Then the tea would be placed in a mortar and reduced to a fine powder. The grains would fall softly, like green-brown dust, gathering in a small vessel. The water, too, deserved attention. Lu Yu wrote about water with unusual care. Not all water, he believed, was the same. Water from mountain streams, rivers, or wells could differ in taste and quality. We might say that minerals and freshness affect flavor. Lu Yu did not use modern chemistry, but he observed closely. He noticed that tea was shaped not only by the leaf, but by everything that met the leaf. So the water was heated. At first it rested quietly. Then tiny bubbles appeared, clinging to the bottom of the pot. A faint tremble passed through the surface. The sound was small, like distant rain beginning beyond a courtyard wall. As the heat rose, the water moved more freely. Steam lifted in pale strands. The person preparing tea watched and listened. In such details, tea became a practice of attention. The ladle touched the pot. Powdered tea entered the water. The liquid darkened and swirled. Its scent rose slowly, earthy and warm, different from the fresh green teas or amber black teas familiar in later centuries. The bowl was filled and placed carefully on the low table. There was no need for excess. Lu Yu admired simplicity and refinement. Refinement means careful beauty, skill, or elegance. In his writing, tea was not made grand by luxury alone. It was made meaningful by right proportion, clean tools, good water, suitable fire, and a quiet mind. Still, it is helpful to remember that books often preserve ideals. The classic of tea tells us much about educated taste and the refined world of people who had time and means to study such matters. Not everyone in Tang China would have prepared tea exactly as Lu Yu described. Farmers, travelers, monks, officials, and families may have followed different local customs. Some tea was plain and practical. Some was carefully arranged. Some was probably shared with little ceremony at all. Yet Lu Yu's work mattered because it gave language to a growing culture. He looked at tea and saw a complete world: soil, plant, harvest, craft, water, flame, vessel, hand, and guest. He noticed that a drink begins long before it reaches the bowl. It begins in a hillside where leaves catch mist and rain. It continues in the hands that pick and process those leaves. It travels through storage, preparation, and the quiet moment when someone lifts the bowl. The Cha Jing helped raise tea into an art of care. This art was not loud or showy. It lived in small choices: the right tool placed where it could be reached, the water heated with attention, the tea prepared with respect for its nature, the bowl offered with calm intention. Over time, Lu Yu's influence spread through later tea culture. His book was copied, read, admired, and remembered. Tea drinkers after him did not always follow Tang methods, for tea preparation continued to change. In the Song dynasty, powdered and whisked tea would flourish in new ways. Later still, steeped loose-leaf tea would become common. Each age would bring its own forms, but the idea that tea could be a cultivated practice remained. A simple bowl of tea could invite observation. The eye followed the steam, the ear noticed the murmur of water, the hand felt warmth through clay or porcelain, the breath received a faint fragrance, the taste arrived last, gentle and lingering. One can picture the study again after the tea has been poured. The brazier glows lower now, the tools have been set aside. Outside, perhaps bamboo leaves move in a mild wind. Inside, the bowl rests on the table, its surface still for a moment before it is lifted. From such rooms, tea's meaning continued to widen. It would be welcomed in monasteries, where monks sat through long hours of meditation and study. It would appear beside inkstones and brushes, near poems and scrolls, in conversations between scholars and friends. The art of preparation opened naturally into the art of contemplation. And so, from the quiet study and the softly steaming bowl, the story moves onward, to temple courtyards at dawn, to calligraphy tables by open windows, and to those who found in tea a partner for thought. Chapter 4. Tea Travels to Monasteries and Scholars. In the quiet courtyards of Chinese monasteries, tea found another kind of home. The morning might begin before the sun had fully lifted over the tiled roofs. Pale light rested on stone steps. Pines stood dark and still against the sky. Somewhere inside a wooden hall, incense drifted in a thin, fragrant line, and the soft sound of a bell marked the hour. Monks moved through the courtyard with measured steps, their robes brushing lightly as they passed. In such places, tea was not only a drink of taste or refinement, it was useful in a simple human way. Buddhist monks often spent long hours in meditation, study, chanting, and copying texts. Meditation means quiet mental focus, a practice of attention and awareness. During these long periods of stillness, tea could help support wakefulness. Its natural caffeine, though not described in ancient terms as we would describe it now, made the mind feel clearer and the body a little less heavy. So a bowl of tea beside a monk was both ordinary and meaningful. It warmed the hands in a cold hall. It moistened the throat after chanting. It helped the eyes remain open over a scroll. It gave a small rhythm to the day, like sweeping a courtyard or lighting a lamp. The connection between tea and Buddhism did not appear all at once. It developed gradually, in different ways across regions and schools. A monastery in one mountain valley might have had its own customs, while another temple far away prepared tea differently. Some monks may have valued tea mostly as a practical aid. Others may have come to see it as part of a wider discipline of attention. In either case, the preparation of tea suited the pace of monastic life. Water warmed, leaves softened, steam rose, and the bowl was received with care. By the Tang dynasty, tea culture was growing more visible in China, and monasteries were among the places where it was cultivated, shared, and appreciated. Temples often stood in mountain regions where tea plants could grow nearby, their glossy leaves catching mist and rain. A small garden near a monastery path might hold tea shrubs among bamboo and moss. Fresh leaves could be gathered, processed, and prepared for the community. One can imagine a dawn scene, a monk seated near a low table, a bowl of tea close at hand, the wooden beams above darkened by years of smoke and weather. Outside, wind moves gently through pine needles. Inside, the room is still. The tea is not separate from the moment. It belongs to the cool air, the faint incense, the worn floorboards, and the long practice of returning attention to the present. Beyond the monastery walls, tea was also becoming a companion of scholars. In imperial China, a scholar official was an educated government worker, often trained in literature, history, philosophy, and poetry. But they were also part of a refined literary culture. They read and wrote poems, practiced calligraphy, and gathered with friends to discuss ideas. Calligraphy is the art of beautiful writing. In their rooms were brushes, inkstones, scrolls, and books, and increasingly there was tea. A scholar's room might be simple or elegant. A small table stood near an open window. On it lay a brush, a cake of ink, perhaps a half-finished poem, and a cup with a little steam curling above it. Outside the window, bamboo leaves shifted in the wind, or rain tapped softly on broad leaves. Tea became part of this atmosphere of thought. Poets wrote about tea as a friend to solitude and conversation. Calligraphers paused over tea before returning to the movement of the brush. Officials, tired from duties, might share tea with companions and speak of mountains, rivers, books, or the changing seasons. In literature, tea often appears as a drink that clears the mind and lightens the spirit. It is shown beside moonlight, spring water, old pines, and quiet friendship. Yet poetry is not the same as a daily record. A poem may polish a moment until it shines more brightly than ordinary life. It may make tea seem more graceful, more fragrant, or more serene than it was in every household and every day. Still, such poems tell us something important. They show that tea had become a symbol of cultivated attention. It could suggest simplicity, good taste, companionship, and closeness to nature. During the Tang and Song dynasties, tea became deeply linked with literature and art. The Tang, from 618 to 907, saw tea spread widely and gain prestige among monks, nobles, officials, and writers. The Song dynasty, from 960 to 1279, carried tea culture into even more elaborate forms. In Song times, powdered tea was often whisked with hot water, creating a pale froth in the bowl. Gatherings sometimes centered on the color, fragrance, and texture of prepared tea. Painters and poets noticed these moments, and tea entered the world of artistic expression. Still, tea remained both ordinary and symbolic. It could be served to a guest simply because the guest had arrived. It could also be prepared with great attention, turning a common act into something like art. A person might drink tea alone while reading, or share it with a friend after a walk through a garden. The same leaves could belong to daily routine and to refined imagination. Tea gatherings among scholars were often gentle occasions for conversation and contemplation. Friends might meet in a garden pavilion, beside a stream, or in a room open to the sound of rain. They might compare water from different springs, admire a bowl, or speak of a poem. They might say very little. The setting mattered: the angle of light, the season, the scent of leaves, the sound of water heating over charcoal. In this way, tea helped create a space between activity and stillness. It did not remove people from the world. Rather, it gave them a way to notice the world more carefully. A cup could draw attention to the taste of water, the shape of a bowl, the presence of a guest, or the silence after a line of poetry. From monastery halls to scholars' rooms, tea carried many meanings. It supported wakefulness, offered warmth, welcomed visitors, and gave form to quiet thought. It belonged to practical life, and it belonged to art. It was prepared by hands, lifted to the lips, written into poems, and remembered in paintings. Over time, monks, travelers, texts, and seeds would carry tea beyond China's shores. The soundscape begins to shift softly, from temple bells and pine wind to the murmur of water against a boat's hull. Across the sea, on islands of rain-dark wood and mossy gardens, tea would take root again, becoming part of another culture's patient way of attention. Chapter 5. Tea crosses the sea to Japan. Between China and Japan, the sea has often been a path as much as a boundary. Across its changing waters moved ships with curved wooden hulls, carrying monks, diplomats, students, merchants, books, paintings, medicines, and seeds. Some journeys were official, arranged by courts and governments. Others were quieter, made by religious travelers seeking teachers, scriptures, and new ways of practice. Among the many things that crossed this sea was tea. It did not arrive all at once, in a single moment, or by the hand of one person alone. Like many traditions, tea came to Japan in layers. A few seeds here, a memory of preparation there, a written description, a bowl shared in a temple, a plant tended beside a monastery path. Over time, these small beginnings took root. Tea may have reached Japan as early as the 8th or 9th century, during a period when Japan was learning deeply from Chinese culture. The early Heian period, beginning in 794, was a time when Japanese envoys and monks traveled to Tang, China, then one of the great centers of art, learning, religion, and government in East Asia. They returned with Buddhist texts, ritual objects, knowledge of architecture and writing, and it is believed early knowledge of tea. Two important monks often linked with this early transmission are Saicho and Kukai. Both traveled to China in the early 9th century. Saicho helped establish the Tendai school of Buddhism in Japan, and Kukai founded the Shingon tradition. Their journeys were part of a wider movement of exchange, in which religious learning traveled with practical knowledge and everyday customs. One can imagine a monk returning from China with carefully wrapped scrolls, small religious images, and perhaps seeds or memories of a plant valued in monasteries. The boat moves slowly over gray-blue water. The air smells of salt and damp wood. Inside the vessel, bundles are protected from spray and wind. A few passengers sit quietly, watching the horizon soften, where sea and sky meet. In China, tea had already become familiar in monastic settings. A monastery is a place where monks or nuns live and practice, often in a rhythm of study, ritual, and meditation. Tea was useful in such places because it could support wakefulness during long periods of sitting, chanting, or reading. It was also valued as a medicinal drink, something believed to help the body and clear the mind. In early Japan, tea was not yet a common daily drink for everyone. It was rare, and its use was limited. It appeared in temples and among people close to courtly or religious circles. The plant itself needed the right conditions to grow, and the knowledge of how to prepare it had to be learned and remembered. Early tea in Japan would not have looked exactly like later Japanese tea ceremony, nor exactly like a modern cup of steeped leaves. Guided by Chinese examples and adapted to Japanese surroundings. In temple gardens, tea plants could grow near mossy paths and wooden buildings. Their leaves were glossy and evergreen, holding their color through the turning seasons. Pines leaned over roofs. Stone lanterns gathered shadows in their carved openings. Rain tapped softly on wooden eaves, and water traced narrow lines down darkened beams. In such places, tea was both useful and quietly meaningful, a drink connected with care, study, and discipline. For a time, tea remained a small presence in Japan. It was known but not yet deeply rooted in broad society. Then, centuries later, another wave of contact with China gave Japanese tea culture new strength. This later development was closely connected with Zen Buddhism. Zen is a form of Buddhism that emphasizes meditation and direct awareness. Rather than depending only on words or texts, Zen practice gives great importance to attentive experience. Sitting, breathing, observing, and meeting the present moment clearly. Tea, with its gentle bitterness, warmth, and capacity to keep the mind alert, fit naturally into some Zen monastic routines. One of the most important figures in this later transmission was Aizai, a Japanese Zen monk who traveled to China in the late 12th century. Like the earlier monks before him, Aizai did not bring tea into an empty world. Tea had already reached Japan in earlier forms, but he helped renew and strengthen its place there. Aizai returned from China with tea seeds and knowledge of tea practices. These seeds were planted, and tea cultivation began to grow more firmly in Japanese soil. The image is a quiet one. Small seeds placed into earth, covered gently, watered by rain. From them tender shoots appear, then leaves, then shrubs strong enough to be harvested. What had traveled across the sea became rooted in mountain slopes, temple grounds, and garden edges. In 1211, Aizai wrote a text called Kissa Yojoki, often translated as drinking tea for health. In it he praised tea's benefits. The title reminds us that tea was still strongly associated with the body as well as the mind. It was not only a refined pleasure, it was also considered a helpful plant, a medicine-like drink, and a companion to disciplined practice. From temples, tea gradually moved into other circles. Aristocrats, or members of the courtly upper classes, became interested in tea. Later, warriors also adopted tea practices, and over time townspeople would join the story as well. Each group shaped tea in its own way. Some valued it for health, some for alertness, some for elegance, hospitality, collecting fine objects, or quiet conversation. In the centuries after Aizai, powdered green tea became especially important in Japan. This powder is called matcha. Matcha is made from tea leaves that are processed and ground very finely, then whisked with hot water rather than steeped and removed. In a dark bowl, the powder can appear bright green, almost luminous like new moss after rain. When water is added and a bamboo whisk moves through it, the surface becomes soft with foam. This powdered tea tradition was influenced by practices that had flourished in Song Dynasty China, where powdered and whisked tea was admired. In China, tea styles would continue changing in other directions, especially towards steeped loose leaves. In Japan, however, powdered tea found a lasting home. It became part of monastic life, social gatherings, and eventually the highly refined tea practices that would develop much later. The Japanese tea ceremony did not appear fully formed as soon as tea arrived. It developed over many generations. Early temple tea, medicinal tea, courtly tea gatherings, Zen practice, warrior culture, and artistic taste all contributed to what would later become Chanoyu, the Japanese tea gathering. Traditions rarely grow in straight lines. They gather rain from many clouds. Under the soft rain of a Japanese temple garden, tea leaves grow near stone and moss. A wooden gate stands slightly open. Pines move gently in the wind. Somewhere inside, water is heated, and green powder waits in a small container. The bowl is simple, the room quiet, and the gestures are still becoming what they will one day be. In the next centuries, these early practices would be refined with great care. The path of tea would lead toward a small room, a low doorway, tatami mats, a kettle, a bamboo whisk, and the gentle discipline of preparing one bowl with complete attention. Chapter 6. The Japanese Tea Ceremony. In time, the tea brought from China took root in Japan in many ways. It grew in temple grounds and mountain gardens. It was prepared by monks, enjoyed by nobles, shared among warriors, and later welcomed into the lives of townspeople. Among these many paths, one especially careful practice came to be known as chanoyu, a word that means hot water for tea. Chanoyu is also called sado or chado, meaning the way of tea. The word way suggests more than a method. It points to a practice learned slowly through repeated attention. In chanoyu, powdered green tea called matcha is prepared and shared. The host measures the tea, adds hot water, and uses a bamboo whisk to bring the drink into a soft green foam. The guest receives the bowl with gratitude. The gestures are simple, yet each one has been shaped by centuries of thought, teaching, and use. The tea room itself may be small and plain. A guest might enter through a low doorway, bending slightly to pass inside. This lowering of the body is not only practical, it gently encourages humility, reminding everyone that within the tea room, rank and noise can be set aside. Beneath the feet are tatami, woven straw mats with a quiet, grassy scent. A kettle rests nearby, its steam rising softly. The sound of water may be faint, almost like a murmur from another room. There may be a single flower in a simple vase. There may be a hanging scroll, chosen for the season or the occasion. The bowl may not be perfectly round. Its glaze may be rough in one place, smooth in another. It may show the mark of a hand, the touch of fire, or the soft changes that come with age. Such objects are not valued because they are flawless. They are valued because they are present, useful, and alive of character. This feeling is often described through the words wabi-sabi. There is no perfect translation into English. In simple terms, wabi-sabi is an appreciation of quiet beauty. Beauty in simplicity, in age, in weathering, in things that are imperfect and passing. A bamboo scoop, a clay bowl, a faded wooden post, or a flower that will bloom only briefly may all carry this feeling. Wabi-sabi does not ask an object to be grand. It asks us to look gently and notice what is already there. The Japanese tea ceremony did not appear all at once, and it has never been only one fixed thing. It developed over centuries, especially during the 15th and 16th centuries, shaped by many influences. Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on meditation and direct awareness, helped form part of its spirit. Aristocratic culture, warrior society, artistic taste, and everyday hospitality also played their parts. Different schools of tea developed, each with its own teachings and details. Even today, chanoyu is practiced, studied, adapted, and lived by people in many settings. Among the important figures in this history was Murata Juko, who lived in the 15th century and is often associated with an early form of wabi tea. He helped guide tea away from displays of luxury toward something quieter and more inward. Fine Chinese objects were still admired, but simple Japanese utensils also came to be valued. A small room, a modest bowl, and a sincere gathering could hold great meaning. Later, Takeno-jo further shaped this aesthetic. He brought together poetry, taste, restraint, and the atmosphere of the tea gathering. In his world, the season mattered deeply. A utensil might be chosen because its color suited autumn. A flower might suggest early spring. A sweet served before the tea might echo the feeling of rain, snow, or new leaves. Then in the 16th century, Sen no Rikyu became one of the most influential figures in the history of Chano-yu. His name is still closely connected with the tea ceremony today. Rikyu refined the use of small key rooms and simple objects. He emphasized an atmosphere of sincerity, restraint, and quiet attention. The form associated with him did not end change or variety, but it deeply shaped later tea practice. 4 values are often linked with Chano-yu: harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. Harmony may be seen in the relationship between host and guest, room and season, utensil and gesture. Respect appears in the careful handling of objects and in the attention given to each person present. Purity does not mean perfection. It can mean the clearing away of distraction, the rinsing of utensils, the freshening of the heart. Tranquility is not forced stillness, but the calm that may arise when each movement is given its proper space. In a tea gathering, even ordinary actions are given attention. The host folds a cloth, the kettle lid is lifted. Hot water is poured into the bowl. Matcha is added in a measured amount. The chasen or bamboo whisk moves lightly through the water, brushing the green powder until it becomes smooth. The bowl is turned, offered, received. There is silence, but it is not empty. It is filled with steam, breath, and the small sounds of utensils touching tatami or wood. Seasonal awareness is central to the practice. In winter, the kettle may seem especially welcoming, and the room may feel close and warm. In spring, a flower might speak of new growth. In summer, the arrangement may suggest coolness, shade, or flowing water. In autumn, the colors of the utensils may echo dry grasses and turning leaves. The scroll, the sweets, the bowl, the flowers, and even the placement of the hearth can change with the time of year. Yet Japanese tea culture is broader than formal Chano-yu. People in Japan drink tea in many everyday ways. Green tea with meals, bottled tea from shops, roasted tea in homes, tea shared casually with friends. The ceremony is one important path, but not the whole landscape. It is a way of slowing attention around a bowl of matcha, a way of giving shape to hospitality. For a little while, the world of Chano-yu can feel very small. One room, one kettle, one bowl, one guest, one host. But within that smallness is a wide history of gardens, temples, artisans, teachers, and students. The bowl has been shaped by clay and fire, the whisk by bamboo and hand, the tea by leaf, shade, steam, drying, and stone grinding. Each object has traveled its own quiet road to arrive at the moment of sharing. And after the bowl is emptied, the room remains. The flower leans slightly in its vase. The kettle continues to breathe out steam. The tatami holds the memory of careful footsteps. Beyond the low doorway, paths lead outward again, away from the stillness of the tea room, and into a wider world where tea moved not only as powder in a bowl, but as bricks, bundles, and leaves carried across mountains, grasslands, and long roads beneath open skies. Chapter 7: Tea Roads Through Mountains and Empires. Long before tea crossed oceans in wooden ships, it traveled by foot, hoof, and patient human effort across the high places of Asia. From the tea-growing regions of southwestern China, especially Yunnan and Sichuan, paths climbed into mountains where the air grew thin and cool. These were not smooth roads in the modern sense. They were trails, passes, stone steps, muddy tracks, and winding routes that changed with weather, politics, and need. Today, many people call this web of routes the Tea Horse Road, though the phrase is modern. It describes older trade networks where tea and horses were among the important goods. There was no single tea horse road. Instead, there were many roads branching and rejoining, moving through valleys, forests, cliffs, and plateaus. Some paths rose through blue-gray mountains where mist gathered in the folds of the hills. Others passed beside rivers that flashed pale under the sky. In the distance, snow might rest on the highest ridges, quiet and bright. Along these routes, tea was often made into compressed forms. Loose leaves would have been difficult to carry over long distances, especially through damp weather and rough terrain. So tea was pressed into firm cakes, bricks, or other shapes. Brick tea means tea leaves compressed into a hard block. These blocks were durable, easier to stack, and easier to wrap for travel. A brick of tea could fit securely in a bundle on the back of a mule, horse, yak, or human porter. Wrapped in cloth, bamboo, hide, or paper, the tea moved slowly upward from warmer growing lands into colder regions. Pack animals stepped carefully along narrow paths. Their bells sounded softly in the mountain air, a small steady music among the rocks. Travelers moved at the pace of the land. A steep slope could take many hours. A storm could delay a caravan for days. Snow, landslides, exhaustion, and difficult crossings were all part of the journey. It is easy from far away in time to imagine only the beauty of such roads, the pine smoke, the clear streams, the distant peaks. And there was beauty, but the labor was real. Traders, porters, animal handlers, and local communities carried the weight of this movement. The routes linked cultures and landscapes, but they also demanded strength, knowledge, and care. Tea traveled west and south into Tibet and the Himalayan world, where it became woven into daily life in a very different form from the delicate bowls of Tang scholars or the powdered tea of later Japanese ceremony. In the highlands, tea was practical, nourishing, and warming. It answered the needs of climate and habit. In Tibetan homes and monasteries, tea was often prepared with salt and yak butter, and sometimes milk. Yak butter tea is made by blending tea with butter from the yak, a long-haired animal well-suited to cold, high-altitude regions. The result is not sweet, like many modern milk teas. It is rich, salty, and sustaining. In cold air, where the body needs warmth and energy, such a drink could be deeply useful. One may picture a wooden bowl held between both hands, steam rising into a room scented with smoke and wool. Outside, the wind moves over high slopes. Inside, butter tea is shared and refilled, part of hospitality, work, prayer, and ordinary conversation. In this setting, tea is not only a refined pleasure, it is food, comfort, and custom. For Chinese states, the movement of tea into Tibetan and Inner Asian regions was often tied to the movement of horses in the other direction. Horses from Tibet and other Inner Asian lands were valued for their strength and endurance. At different times, Chinese governments needed such horses for transport, communication, and military use. Tea desired in the highlands and grasslands could be exchanged for them. This tea for horses trade took many forms over the centuries. Sometimes it was managed by governments. Sometimes it moved through local and private exchange. The details changed from dynasty to dynasty and from one frontier region to another. But the pattern left a strong memory, tea moving outward from the mountains of southwest China and horses moving back across the borders of empire. The trade was never only about goods, it also carried languages, tastes, habits, and knowledge. A brick of tea might pass through many hands before reaching a distant household. It might be loaded in a humid valley, carried over a cold pass, traded in a market town, and brewed months later in a place where tea bushes could not easily grow. In this way, tea became a traveler. It belonged to the soil where it was cultivated, but also to every road that carried it onward. Beyond Tibet, tea moved into Mongolia and across the wide grasslands of Inner Asia. Here again, local needs shaped local preparations. In regions of open steppe, where herding life shaped daily rhythms, tea might be boiled with milk, salt, or other additions. It became part of meals and pauses in long days under broad skies. The landscape changed as the routes continued. Mountains opened into plateaus. Plateaus gave way to grasslands where the horizon seemed to rest very far away. Caravans moved beneath skies that could be pale blue, silver with cloud, or dark with approaching weather. The sound of bells and hooves carried over the land, then faded into wind. Tea also traveled farther north and west through Central Asia and toward Russia. These movements were part of larger caravan routes that carried many things: furs, textiles, metals, spices, books, and ideas. A caravan is a group of travelers moving together, often with animals, for safety and support across long distances. Tea was well suited to such travel when pressed into bricks or packed carefully in chests. Brick tea could sometimes serve as more than a drink because it was portable, durable, and widely valued in certain regions. It could act as a trade good and, in some contexts, a store of value. This does not mean tea was money everywhere. Its role changed from place to place, but a compressed block of tea could be counted, carried, stored, and exchanged, which made it useful in markets far from the plant's growing fields. As tea moved along these land routes, it changed in meaning. In one place it might be a tribute good offered to a ruler, in another it might be a household necessity, in another it might be traded for animals, cloth, or grain, in another it might be boiled in a kettle at the edge of a camp while travelers rested from the day's road. The mountain tea roads remind us that tea history is not only a story of gardens and bowls, it is also a story of movement, backs bent under bundles, animals stepping carefully over stone, traders reading weather and terrain, families waiting in cold homes for goods from far away. It is a story of exchange across borders that were sometimes open, sometimes guarded, and often shifting. Even so, the image may settle gently in the mind, a caravan at dusk, pausing beside a mountain path. The animals stand quietly, their loads wrapped tight against the evening cold. Smoke rises from a small fire. Somewhere a kettle warms. A piece of compressed tea is broken from a brick, dark and firm in the hand. Soon it will soften in hot water, releasing its color and scent into the thin air. From these high roads, tea continued outward, and while caravans carried tea across land, another kind of journey was growing in importance. Far to the south and east, harbors opened to the sea, chests were lifted from warehouses, sails were prepared, maps lay across wooden tables, marked with coastlines, winds, and ports. The slow bells of mountain caravans began to fade into the creak of masts and the quiet wash of waves. Tea, which had crossed passes and plateaus, was turning toward the ocean. Its next journey would carry it to Europe, where it would arrive as something rare, costly, and unfamiliar, waiting to be understood in yet another way. Chapter 8. Tea reaches Europe. For many centuries, tea had already been cultivated, prepared, praised, traded, and shared across parts of Asia before it became known in Europe. By the time European travelers began writing about it, tea was not a new discovery, but an old and living tradition. It had grown in misty hills, rested in baskets and jars, crossed mountain roads, entered monasteries, and found a place in poems, ceremonies, markets, and homes. Europe came to know tea slowly, through contact with China and East Asia. The first meetings were part of a wider movement of ships, letters, merchants, missionaries, and maps. Along the sea routes of the 16th century, Portuguese traders and missionaries were among the earliest Europeans to encounter tea and describe it in writing. They met it in places where tea already had meaning, in Chinese households, in ports, in conversations with officials and scholars, and in the daily habits of people for whom the drink was familiar. One may imagine a traveler watching hot water poured over leaves for the first time, noticing the pale color spreading through the cup, the quiet fragrance rising with the steam. The taste may have seemed unusual at first, not sweet like wine, not thick like broth, not spiced like many European drinks of the time. It was clear, warm, and lightly bitter, with an aroma that suggested leaves, earth, and distant rain. From such small observations, tea entered European books and letters before it entered most European cups. The journey itself was long. Ships left Asian ports carrying many kinds of goods, silk folded into bales, spices sealed in containers, lacquered objects, medicines, painted screens, and porcelain. Porcelain is a fine, hard ceramic, often white and delicate, used for cups, bowls, and dishes. Chinese porcelain was greatly admired in Europe. It seemed almost luminous when held to the light, smooth beneath the fingers, and strong despite its thinness. Tea traveled beside these objects. Sometimes it was packed in chests, carefully sealed against damp air and salt spray. It crossed warm seas and rounded distant coasts. It waited in the holds of ships while sailors watched clouds and currents. It passed through harbors where many languages mingled, where ledgers were opened, goods were weighed, and crates were moved with slow care from ship to shore. By the early 17th century, the Dutch East India Company began importing tea to Europe in more regular commercial quantities. This company is often known by its initials, VOC, from its Dutch name. It was a powerful trading company, active across parts of Asia, with ships, warehouses, officials, and merchants. Through the VOC, tea began to appear in the Netherlands and then in other parts of Europe. At first, tea was rare and expensive. A small quantity of leaves might be treated almost like a treasure, measured carefully, and served to a guest as something unusual. In candlelit rooms, on polished tables, the new drink stood beside other imported luxuries. A porcelain cup might be lifted with curiosity. A merchant might record the price in a ledger. A host might explain that the leaves had come from China, carried over a distance that was difficult to picture fully. Tea entered Europe not as an everyday refreshment, but as a luxury good. A luxury good is something costly and not available to most people. Wealthy households, merchants connected to overseas trade, and courtly circles were among the first to taste it. In these settings, tea was part drink, part fashion, and part sign of connection to the wider world. Yet, even in its rarity, tea invited attention. People wondered how it should be brewed. Should the water be fully boiling or only hot? How many leaves should be used? Should the drink be taken plain or sweetened? European habits developed gradually, and they differed from place to place. Some early drinkers approached tea as a medicine, as people in Asia had also done in earlier times. Others approached it as a novelty, a refined beverage to be served among fine objects and polite conversation. The words used for tea also carried traces of the routes by which it traveled. In many European languages, forms like tea, or te likely came through coastal Chinese pronunciations, such as te, heard in trading regions connected with maritime routes. Other forms, such as cha or chai, came through different Chinese pronunciations and often through overland or other trade pathways. These words are like small maps hidden in language. They remember the ports, caravans, interpreters, and marketplaces through which the leaves moved. Tea's arrival in Europe belonged to a larger story of exchange, curiosity, competition, and empire. It came with porcelain, silk, spices, and other goods that reshaped tastes and habits. People learned from one another, adapted customs, and developed new rituals. At the same time, trade was not only a gentle meeting of cultures. European companies competed fiercely for profit and influence, and their activities became tied to expanding imperial power. The story of tea in Europe therefore carries both the charm of curiosity and the weight of history. Still, in the quiet moment of preparation, the scene could be very simple. A few leaves placed in a pot, hot water poured, steam rising in a slow ribbon, someone waiting, perhaps uncertain how long was proper, watching the water darken little by little, a cup set down beside a map, a journal, or an open account book. Outside, a harbor might be still in the evening light, with masts standing against the sky and crates stacked along the quay. Over time, this rare leaf would become more familiar. It would move from merchant houses into drawing rooms, from courtly tables into public places, from expensive fashion toward daily habit. Its taste would be altered by local preferences, by sugar, by milk, by new vessels and new manners of serving. Each country would shape tea in its own way. Among the places where tea would take especially deep root was Britain. There, in London coffee houses, royal circles, and eventually domestic tables of many kinds, tea would slowly become part of the rhythm of ordinary life. The next part of the journey carries us from the wider harbors of Europe toward the soft clink of cups in Britain, where a once rare import became one of the most familiar drinks in the land. Chapter 9. Tea in Britain. On a quiet British table, tea arrived first as a small and costly curiosity. Imagine a room in London in the middle of the 17th century. Outside, narrow streets carry the sounds of carts, footsteps, and distant church bells. Inside a coffee house, where people gather to read news, exchange ideas, and speak of trade, a new drink is being advertised. Coffee houses were public places for conversation and refreshment, and by the 1650s, tea was beginning to appear among their offerings. At first, it was not an everyday drink for most people. The leaves had traveled a long way from China, passing through merchants, ships, and storehouses before reaching Britain. A small quantity could be expensive. It might be measured carefully, locked away, or served to guests as something unusual and refined. Its fragrance was unfamiliar, its preparation still new, and its presence at the table carried a quiet sense of fashion. Tea became more visible in courtly life after the marriage of King Charles II to Catherine of Braganza in 1662. Catherine was Portuguese, and Portugal had long trading connections with Asia. She was accustomed to tea, and her fondness for it helped make the drink fashionable among the English court. She did not introduce tea to Britain single-handedly. Tea was already known in some circles, but royal taste mattered, and what appeared at court often drifted outward, slowly, into the homes of wealthy families, and then into broader society. One may picture a small teapot warming near the hearth, its surface catching the glow of firelight. Nearby, thin porcelain cups weighed on a polished table. Porcelain became part of the beauty of tea service in Europe. Cups, saucers, teapots, and delicate bowls were valued not only for their usefulness, but for their smooth whiteness, painted flowers, and graceful shapes. As the 18th century unfolded, tea grew steadily more popular in Britain. It moved from novelty to habit, from rare luxury to a familiar presence in many homes, though not all households drank it in the same way. Wealthy families might keep tea in a tea caddy, a small container often locked because the leaves were precious. Tea tables, sugar bowls, sugar tongs, milk jugs, folded napkins, and polished spoons formed a quiet arrangement of domestic life. Each object had its place. Each gesture, from measuring leaves to pouring water, became part of a shared rhythm. The tea itself was often black tea, dark and clear in the cup, with steam curling gently upward. Sugar was commonly added, and over time milk became a familiar companion as well. The reasons for adding milk were likely mixed: taste, custom, temperature, and perhaps the wish to soften the strength of the brew. Some have suggested that milk helped protect delicate cups from sudden heat, though this may not explain the whole habit. Like many customs, it grew gradually, shaped by preference and repetition. Sugar, however, carries a more difficult history. The sweetness stirred into British tea was deeply tied to Atlantic slavery and empire. Enslaved people were forced to labor on sugar plantations in the Caribbean and elsewhere under harsh and unjust conditions. In a calm telling of tea's history, this truth should not be forgotten. The gentle clink of sugar tongs at a tea table belonged to a wider world of trade, power, and suffering, as well as taste and fashion. Tea in Britain was never only a domestic story. It was connected to many distant hands and lands. Still, within British homes, tea took on many meanings. It could be a sign of refinement, a welcome for guests, a pause in the afternoon, or warmth after work. It might be poured in a drawing room, where conversation moved softly from family matters to letters and books. It might also be prepared in simpler kitchens, where the table was sturdy, the cups plain, and the meal more practical. Tea drinking differed by class, region, and household. There was no single British tea table, but many tables, each with its own pattern. During the 18th century, taxes on tea made it expensive. Because the government placed duties on imported tea, legal tea could cost far more than many people wished to pay. This encouraged smuggling, which means secretly bringing goods into a country to avoid taxes. Smuggled tea entered Britain through hidden routes and quiet arrangements, sometimes mixed with lower quality leaves or other materials. At the table, its meaning was simple. Tea was desired, and price shaped how people obtained it. In the late 18th century, lower tea taxes helped make legally imported tea more affordable. As prices fell, tea became more widely available. The locked caddy did not disappear, but the drink gradually became less exclusive. More families could afford to keep tea in the home. More cups were poured in ordinary rooms. More kettles were set to boil as part of daily routine. By the 19th century, tea had settled deeply into British domestic life. Afternoon light might fall across a tablecloth, touching the edge of a teapot, a plate of bread, a small dish of butter, or later a tray of cakes and sandwiches. The custom known as afternoon tea is often associated with Anna, Duchess of Bedford, in the 1840s. It is said that she enjoyed taking tea with a light meal during the long stretch between luncheon and a late dinner. Her habit became fashionable among her circle, and over time afternoon tea developed into a social occasion. Yet this too should be told gently. Afternoon tea did not arise from one single moment. People had already been drinking tea between meals in various ways. The Duchess is linked with the refinement and popularity of the custom, but the habit grew from broader patterns of appetite, society, and domestic comfort. Afternoon tea and high tea are often confused, though they were not the same. Afternoon tea was usually a lighter social meal, with tea, bread, cakes, or sandwiches, often served in more leisured settings. High tea in many working households was a more substantial evening meal. It might include bread, cheese, meat, eggs, or other filling foods, along with tea. In this way, tea belonged both to elegance and to nourishment, to polished parlors and to hard-working homes. Across Britain, the sound of tea became familiar. Water poured into a pot, porcelain touching porcelain, a spoon stirring once or twice, a quiet pause before conversation continued. Tea offered hospitality, but also routine. It marked time without needing grandeur. Morning, afternoon, or evening, it could gather people for a few minutes around a common warmth. And yet if one looks into the cup, there is more than steam and amber color. There are ships and taxes, sugar islands and porcelain kilns, royal fashions and working kitchens, smuggling routes and family tables. There are people who planted, picked, packed, shipped, sold, brewed, and shared the leaves. From the British table, the story widens again. The cup and caddy lead the imagination backward, along the routes that supplied them, toward global trade, colonial power, and the green tea gardens of India and Sri Lanka, where the next chapter of tea's history slowly takes shape. Chapter 10: Tea, Trade, and Changing Worlds. By the 18th and 19th centuries, tea had become more than a fragrant leaf in a bowl or cup. It was now part of a wide world of ships, ledgers, ports, warehouses, taxes, gardens, and labor. The small leaves of Camellia sinensis, once gathered in misty hills and prepared in quiet rooms, had entered the great currents of global trade. In Britain, tea drinking had grown steadily from a fashionable custom into a daily habit for many people. The demand was immense. Cup by cup, household by household, Britain bought large quantities of Chinese tea. For a long time, China was the main source of the tea that Europeans desired, and Chinese growers, merchants, and officials were central to the trade. The British East India Company played a major role in this story. It was a powerful trading company with close ties to the British state, and it helped carry tea from China to Britain in vast amounts. Its ships traveled long distances across oceans, returning with chests of tea packed carefully for the voyage. In Britain, those chests would be opened, weighed, taxed, sold, blended, and eventually poured into teapots in homes and shops. But this trade was not simple. Britain bought so much tea from China that large amounts of silver flowed eastward in payment. This created what is often called a trade imbalance, meaning that one side was buying far more than it was selling in return. Over time, British imperial trade became connected with opium, China, and the Opium Wars of the 19th century. These wars were not caused by tea alone. They belonged to a larger and troubling system of commerce, empire, addiction, and political pressure. Still, tea was part of the wider pattern because the desire for Chinese goods helped shape the flow of money and trade. This part of tea's history carries both botanical ingenuity and human hardship. It reminds us that even the gentlest daily customs can be connected to large forces beyond the cup. As Britain's appetite for tea grew, British officials and planters sought ways to grow tea outside China. They wanted new sources of supply, especially within lands controlled by the British Empire. Their attention turned to India, where the climate in certain regions seemed well suited to the tea plant. In northeastern India, in the region of Assam, indigenous tea plants were already growing. Local communities, including the Singpho, knew and used tea before British plantation expansion. This is important to say clearly. The British did not discover tea in India. Rather, they encountered existing plants and local knowledge, and then folded them into a new commercial system shaped by colonial power. Assam is a land of broad rivers, deep green vegetation, and heavy seasonal rains. In the morning, mist may rest over the low hills and fields. Tea bushes, when planted in rows, spread across the land in soft patterns of green. Their leaves are broad and glossy, catching droplets of rain. Workers move through the gardens with baskets, plucking the tender new shoots that will later become tea. Commercial tea plantations began to develop in Assam from the 1830s onward. A plantation is a large farm, usually growing one main crop for sale. In Assam, these plantations were organized to produce tea on a large scale for export. Leaves were plucked, carried, withered, rolled, oxidized, dried, sorted, packed, and shipped away. Oxidation is a natural chemical change that happens when tea leaves react with air. In black tea, oxidation is allowed to continue until the leaves darken and develop deeper flavors. In the tea factories, the scent of oxidizing leaves could become warm and rich, sometimes malty, sometimes fruity, sometimes earthy. Rolling tables pressed and twisted the leaves. Drying rooms held steady heat. The work required skill, timing, and many hands. Yet the beauty of the tea gardens should not hide the difficulty of plantation life. Colonial tea production relied on strict systems of control. Workers often faced low wages, harsh conditions, limited freedom, and exhausting labor. Many were recruited or moved under unfair circumstances. Their work helped make tea available to distant markets, but their lives were often marked by hardship. Farther north, in the Himalayan foothills, another tea-growing region took shape: Darjeeling. The name came to be associated with delicate, aromatic teas grown on steep slopes under cool mountain air. Darjeeling tea developed using Chinese tea plants at first, and later hybrids or mixed plant varieties. The gardens climbed along ridges and valleys, where clouds drifted through the bushes and the light changed slowly over the day. There is a quiet loveliness in those landscapes: terraced slopes, narrow paths, baskets of leaves, rain moving gently across the plants. But here, too, the history is more than scenery. Darjeeling tea was also part of the colonial plantation system, and its famous taste was shaped not only by climate and plant variety, but by the labor of many people whose names were rarely written into official histories. Across the sea, another tea story unfolded in Sri Lanka, then known to the British as Ceylon. In the 19th century, Ceylon had been a major coffee-growing colony. But coffee leaf rust, a plant disease caused by a fungus, devastated the coffee plantations. As coffee declined, planters turned increasingly to tea. James Taylor, a Scottish planter, is often associated with early commercial tea cultivation in Ceylon in the 1860s. From small beginnings, tea planting expanded across the island's highlands. Hills that had once held coffee were replanted with tea. Factories were built. Roads and railways helped move the crop. Over time, Ceylon tea became known around the world, especially as a bright, brisk black tea. The highlands of Sri Lanka can be soft and luminous in the early day. Mist gathers in the hollows. Tea bushes follow the curves of the hills. The air may carry the scent of damp earth, crushed leaves, and distant rain. In the factories, fresh leaves are spread to wither, then rolled and dried, becoming the familiar dark strands that travel far from the place where they grew. But as in India, the expansion of tea in Ceylon depended on difficult labor systems. Many workers, including Tamil laborers brought from southern India, endured severe conditions on plantations. Low wages, poor housing, and colonial control were part of the structure that produced tea for global markets. The cup that reached a table far away carried with it the unseen work of many hands. Over time, Indian and Sri Lankan teas helped make black tea more affordable and widely available in Britain and elsewhere. Tea became less rare, less fragile as a luxury, and more woven into ordinary routines. A morning cup, a factory break, a household pot, a railway refreshment room, all these became part of modern tea culture. Still, the wider story asks for a gentle honesty. Tea was spread by curiosity, skill, and agriculture. It was also spread by empire, unequal trade, and human labor under pressure. Its history includes gardens and ships, scientists and merchants, local knowledge and colonial ambition, careful processing and difficult working lives. To hold these truths together is not to take away the quiet pleasure of tea. It is to see the cup more fully. Behind the amber surface are mountains and monsoons, long voyages and changing economies, the knowledge of communities, and the labor of people who planted, plucked, rolled, dried, packed, and carried the leaves. And as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, tea continued to change. It moved into new markets and new forms. It was blended, bagged, sweetened, iced, spiced, and shared in ways both old and new. From the large systems of trade, the story now opens outward again, toward many local traditions. In one place, green leaves are heated soon after picking. In another, black tea glows amber in a cup. Somewhere, mint is pressed gently between the fingers. Somewhere else, spices warm in milk, and a kettle hums beside a window. Tea, shaped by history, becomes many teas and many customs, each with its own quiet meaning. Chapter 11. Many Teas, Many Traditions. Across the long history of tea, one quiet fact remains at the center. All true tea comes from the same plant, Camellia sinensis. It is an evergreen shrub or small tree, with glossy leaves that can become many different kinds of tea in human hands. A cup of pale green tea, a dark amber black tea, a curled and fragrant oolong, and a bowl of powdered matcha may seem, at first, like very different things. Yet their differences come mainly from how the leaves are grown, picked, heated, dried, rolled, aged, or blended. The plant is the beginning. The craft is the path. In one place, freshly picked leaves are heated soon after harvest. This heating may be done by steaming, as is common in Japan, or by pan-firing in a warm vessel, as is common in many Chinese green teas. The purpose is to slow oxidation, a natural change that happens when leaves react with air. With little oxidation, the leaves keep much of their green color and fresh character. Green tea may smell grassy, lightly sweet, oceanic, nutty, or softly vegetal. In a clear cup, it can appear pale gold or spring green like sunlight passing through new leaves. In another cup, the leaves have been allowed to oxidize more fully, their color darkens, and their flavor grows deeper. This is black tea, known in China as red tea because of the reddish color of the brewed liquid. Black tea may be brisk, malty, fruity, floral, or strong enough to welcome milk. It glows amber or copper in the cup. The steam rises with a rounded warmth, and the taste may feel steady and familiar, especially in places where black tea became part of daily life. Between green and black tea lies oolong, a wide and varied family. Oolong tea is partially oxidized, which means the leaves are changed by air, but not as much as black tea. Some oolongs are light and floral, with leaves that unfurl slowly like curled ribbons in hot water. Others are roasted until they carry notes of honey, toasted grain, or warm stone. Watching oolong steep can be a small lesson in patience. The twisted leaves loosen, open, and drift, revealing the shape they once held on the branch. White tea is quieter still. It is usually minimally processed, often made from young buds or tender leaves. Some white tea buds are covered in fine pale down, soft little hairs that catch the light. The taste may be delicate with hints of hay, melon, flowers, or honey. It asks for no hurry. It seems to carry the feeling of a cool morning in a tea garden when the air is still and the leaves are newly gathered. There is also pu'er, often associated with Yunnan and southwestern China, a region long connected with old tea forests and mountain routes. Pu'er may be compressed into cakes, bricks, or small nests, and it is known for aging. Some pu'er changes over time through fermentation, a process involving tiny living microbes that slowly transform the leaves. Its scent can be earthy, mellow, woody, or deep, like rain on forest soil. A cake of pu'er may be stored for years, and each steeping can feel like opening a small door into time. Yellow tea is rarer. It is lightly oxidized and then gently sealed, wrapped, or heaped for a time during processing. This step softens the taste and changes the character of the leaves. Yellow tea is not as widely known as green or black tea, but it belongs to the same broad family of careful human choices, each one shaping leaf, color, fragrance, and cup. And then there is matcha, bright and finely powdered. Matcha is a green tea, traditionally made from tea plants that are shaded before harvest. After picking, the leaves are steamed, dried, and carefully stone ground into a fine powder. Because matcha is whisked into water rather than steeped and removed, the whole powdered leaf becomes part of the drink. In a bowl, matcha can look like a small green field after rain. The bamboo whisk moves in quick, even strokes, and a soft foam gathers on the surface. Elsewhere, tea meets spice, milk, and sweetness. In India, masala chai brings tea together with spices such as cardamom, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, or black pepper. Masala means a mixture of spices, and chai simply means tea in many languages. So the phrase chai tea, often heard in English-speaking places, repeats the word tea. Modern masala chai grew especially popular in the 20th century, shaped partly by British efforts to encourage tea drinking in India, and by local tastes that transformed tea into something distinct and beloved. In a small pot, milk warms with tea leaves and spices. Ginger releases its heat. Cardamom opens with a sweet green fragrance. Sugar rounds the edges. The result is not only a drink, but a rhythm of street stalls, homes, train platforms, and shared pauses. In Morocco, green tea often meets fresh mint and sugar. Moroccan mint tea is poured from a height into small glasses, making a light foam at the top. The mint leaves shine bright green in the glass, and the fragrance is cool and sweet. This tea is often part of hospitality, a way of welcoming guests and marking conversation. Its history is connected to trade, local custom, and the art of serving with grace. Far to the north, Russian tea culture is often associated with the samovar, a heated urn that keeps water hot. A samovar may sit at the center of a table, humming gently in a winter room. Strong tea concentrate can be brewed in a small teapot and diluted with hot water from the samovar. Around it may be cups, preserves, lemon, sugar, and quiet conversation. The samovar is both an object and a gathering point, holding warmth for many cups. Across Tibet and nearby Himalayan regions, tea takes another nourishing form. Butter tea is commonly made with tea, salt, and yak butter, and sometimes milk. In cold, high-altitude climates, this rich drink can provide warmth and energy. Its taste is savory rather than sweet, and its meaning belongs to the landscape and the people who have long lived there. A wooden bowl of steaming butter tea in a mountain home speaks of practicality, hospitality, and adaptation. Not every warm infusion called tea comes from Camellia sinensis. Chamomile, peppermint, rooibos, hibiscus, and many other plants are often called teas in everyday speech. Botanically, if they do not contain the tea plant, they are more precisely called tisanes, meaning herbal infusions. Still, language is gentle and flexible in daily life. People ask for peppermint tea or chamomile tea, and the cup arrives fragrant and warm. It is wise not to name one tea as the healthiest of all, for tea is complex and people are different. Caffeine, too, does not belong to one simple rule. It can vary with the leaf, the plant variety, the season, the size of the pieces, the water temperature, and the length of brewing. A green tea may be strong, a black tea may be gentle. The cup depends on many small details, so the world of tea becomes a mosaic. Green, black, oolong, white, yellow, pu'er, matcha, mint tea, butter tea, masala chai, samovar tea, and many more. Each tradition carries its own history. Each cup has been shaped by soil, weather, trade, memory, labor, and taste. And as these many cups settle softly in the mind, the story begins to turn toward the present day, where old customs continue beside new ones. Loose leaves in glass pots, tea bags in kitchen mugs, iced tea beating with condensation, bubble tea from Taiwan, and quiet cups held in ordinary moments. Tea keeps changing, as it always has, while still beginning with a leaf. Chapter 12. Tea Today and the Quiet Cup. Today, tea is both very old and always new. It belongs to mountain gardens and city counters, to porcelain bowls and paper cups, to careful ceremonies and ordinary work breaks. It is one of the most widely consumed beverages in the world after water, and yet each cup remains small enough to hold in two hands. The leaves still come from Camellia sinensis, the evergreen tea plant whose story began so long ago in East Asia. But the plant now grows in many places, each with its own soil, weather, and ways of working. China and India remain among the largest tea-producing countries. Kenya, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Turkey, Indonesia, and Japan are also important parts of the modern tea world. Across these regions, tea gardens may stretch over hillsides, rest in humid lowlands, or climb into misty mountain air. In one place, morning mist gathers over rows of tea bushes, and workers move carefully among the leaves. In another, broad green slopes catch the sun after rain. In another, small farms and larger estates shape the daily rhythm of planting, plucking, processing, packing, and sending tea onward. The journey of tea is no longer only by caravan bell or wooden ship. It also travels by truck, train, container vessel, and airplane. It appears in paper packets, tins, cloth pouches, glass bottles, and simple cardboard boxes. Yet even in these modern forms, the old pattern remains: leaf, water, waiting, and sharing. Tea is prepared in homes, where a kettle may click off in a quiet kitchen. It is served in tea houses, where people may sit for a long conversation or a few peaceful minutes. It appears in cafes, beside windows glowing softly in rain. It is poured in offices during a pause between tasks. It is prepared in ceremonial spaces, where movements may still follow forms handed down through generations. It is sold at street stalls, where steam rises into busy air, and a cup can be carried away warm in the hand. In some places, loose-leaf tea remains the favored way. The leaves are measured into a pot or infuser, and hot water is poured over them. In a glass teapot, the leaves may swirl and open slowly, as though remembering the shape of the bush. Green leaves brighten the water. Black tea deepens it to amber or copper. Oolong leaves, curled from careful processing, loosen gradually, like small ribbons. In other places, tea bags are part of everyday life. Tea bags became common in the 20th century, especially because they were convenient. They made tea easier to prepare quickly, at home, at work, and while traveling. A tea bag lowered into a mug slowly darkens the water, releasing color in soft clouds. It is a simple method, but it belongs fully to tea's living history. Tea has always changed with the needs of the people who drink it. Modern tea also appears cold. Bottled iced teas line shop shelves, sometimes sweetened, sometimes plain, sometimes flavored with lemon, peach, jasmine, or herbs. A glass of iced tea may bead with condensation on a warm afternoon, the outside of the glass cool and wet to the touch. In many countries, iced tea has become its own tradition, shaped by climate, taste, and daily habit. And then there is bubble tea, a much newer branch of tea's long story. Bubble tea originated in Taiwan in the 1980s. It often combines tea with milk or fruit flavors, and many versions include tapioca pearls, small chewy spheres made from starch. Bubble tea shops now appear in cities around the world, with bright menus and many choices. Some drinks are based on black tea, some on green tea, some on oolong, and others move far from older forms. Like so many tea traditions before it, bubble tea shows how tea can be adapted, refreshed, and made local in new places. Specialty tea shops have also become part of modern tea culture. In these shops, people may choose teas by region, harvest season, processing style, or flavor. A tin may hold a spring green tea from Japan, a fragrant oolong from Taiwan, a malty black tea from Assam, a white tea with pale buds, or an aged pu'er from Yunnan. Labels may describe altitude, cultivar, or oxidation. A cultivar is a cultivated variety of a plant, chosen and cared for because it has particular qualities. Some modern shops and cafes also offer wellness blends and herbal infusions. These may include chamomile, peppermint, ginger, hibiscus, or many other plants. In everyday speech, people often call these drinks teas. Botanically, if they do not contain Camellia sinensis, they are more precisely called tisanes. Many people enjoy them as part of a personal routine, though it is best to be careful with broad health claims. Tea and tisanes can be comforting to many, but they are not the same as medicine unless used under proper guidance. It is also worth remembering that true tea usually contains caffeine, unless it has been decaffeinated. Caffeine is a natural stimulant found in tea, coffee, and some other plants. Decaffeinated tea has had most of its caffeine removed. Herbal tisanes are often caffeine-free, though not always, depending on the plants used. Because people respond differently, tea may feel refreshing to one person, focusing to another, and too stimulating to someone else. The meaning of a cup is personal as well as cultural. Across the world, tea continues to blend old rituals with modern habits. A person may whisk matcha in a bowl using a bamboo whisk, then later buy iced tea from a vending machine. A family may keep a samovar in winter, warming water through the afternoon. A street vendor may stir spiced tea with milk and sugar in a small pot. A friend may offer mint tea in a glass. A worker may carry a paper cup through a station. Someone at home may choose one familiar mug each morning, the handle fitting the hand in the same quiet way. Tea culture is not finished. It has never been fixed. From ancient medicinal leaves to Tang Dynasty bowls, from monastery courtyards to Japanese tea rooms, from mountain trade roads to European tables, from plantations and factories to modern cafes, tea has changed again and again. Its history includes beauty, patience, labor, exchange, invention, and adaptation. It has been rare and expensive. It has been ordinary and everyday. It has belonged to emperors, monks, merchants, farmers, workers, travelers, hosts, guests, and people sitting alone with a moment of quiet. If we look into a single cup, we might imagine many layers. There is the plant itself, glossy-leaved and evergreen. There is rain falling on a hillside. There are hands picking young leaves and other hands sorting, rolling, heating, drying, packing, carrying, selling, brewing, and pouring. There are roads through mountains, ships crossing seas. Tea tables in candlelight, bowls in temples, kettles in kitchens, and glasses bright with mint. There's the soft sound of water just before it boils. There's the slow unfurling of leaves. There's steam rising in pale ribbons. And then there's the present moment, a cup placed near a quiet window, the liquid gradually cooling, the light resting gently on its surface. Outside, perhaps rain moves softly against the glass. Inside, the cup gives off its last warmth. The long history of tea settles into stillness, gathered for a little while in one simple, quiet cup.